It's James with Net News Ledger. We are in the vault on Red River Road in our studio. We have Marek Stiles, the NDP leader, who's the first provincial leader that we've been talking to this year. And we're going to start by talking about the highway situation in the north. You're from Toronto.
Yes.
Toronto has roads everywhere.
Yes.
Up here, when the highway gets closed by an accident, Canada becomes two separate countries. You're here today talking about that. What do our readers and viewers need to know?
Well, first of all, I will tell you, I am from Toronto, but I'm in Toronto and I have been for like 30 years. But for the first 20 years or so of my life, I was in Newfoundland, where roads get closed all the time. We have terrible road conditions when I was growing up. So I kind of relate to some of this. But absolutely, we were here today. One of the reasons I came up was to stand with MPP Lise Beaujois out front of one of the inspection centers to actually talk about the fact that they're often closed and that they should be open 24/7, and also just some of the other things that we have been proposing to the government that they could be doing right now to improve highway safety here and keep the highways open.
Now, part of that is the snow clearing.
Yes.
You know, we get snow up here. Now, December was peaceful and there wasn't very many accidents, but the minute the snow hit, it was like the perpetual all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we've had deaths, and we've had 5 deaths so far this year.
In a month, yeah.
In a month. And that's, like if that happened in Toronto by scale, you would have probably 150 highway deaths and the whole province would go crazy.
We're just not, I think a couple things. One is, and this is something that our Northern Ontario MPPs, like the NDP MPPs, have been raising for years, but we're not keeping up with slow clearing, obviously. So one of the things we've said is that any snowfall has to be cleared within 8 hours. I mean, that's kind of minimum. But there's so many other things that we could be doing right now that would address some of those safety issues. And I think, and you've said this yourself in some of your own writing, that we have like two completely different realities in the way that we address highway safety and conditions here in the Northern Ontario and in Southern Ontario. And of course, obviously weather is different, but we also, the further north and northwest you go, the more the government just seems to want to sort of just disregard it and isn't actually treating northern highways with the same care. And this is not just, of course, the lives that are lost, which let alone, like when you're talking about life and death issues, clearly this should be a priority. But it's also, how we do our trade, how goods move. They have to go through that highway for the most part. And so when we shut those down, as you've said before, when we shut that highway down, we're just essentially dividing the country.
Well, we've had instances last year where there was a several-day shutdown because of an accident, 2 days. All the transport trucks get stuck on the road, and literally grocery stores in Thunder Bay started to run out of things because you couldn't get it here from Toronto. And you never think of that as being something that would happen in Canada in 2022, 2023, and now 2024, but it keeps happening. Now, tomorrow you're headed up to Terrace Bay.
I am.
So you get to experience some of our
yes,
highways
absolutely, and I won't, honestly, given how much our MPPs like Lise talk about these issues in the legislature, I gotta say I'm a little nervous. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, though, again, I think there are some solutions, and you've talked about some things. I think there's some things that they could be doing right now that don't really even cost that much, like actually making it illegal to pass on a double line, for example, which most people don't even realize is not actually illegal. There's something called Chad's Law that we've introduced to deal with that the snow clearing, I think, is a big one. We should be actually doing better training for those commercial drivers.
Absolutely.
That's a huge issue. And I know people up here, we've lost lives here in Northern Ontario. We also, those truck drivers and their families have also been devastated. Better training, keeping those inspection stations open 24/7.
There was an instance just last week where they showed a truck that had been in an accident, and they stopped it at one of the inspection stations further down the road, and the driver was charged because he was running an unsafe vehicle. And I've often thought of that, because if you drive between Winnipeg and Thunder Bay and you do it at night, it is a train track of transport trucks at night, and usually the stations are closed.
Yeah. And we know that, first of all, we don't see the regulation of the trucking schools that we should have. I think those standards definitely need to be higher. I've heard stories, many stories now of, and even talking to, by the way, truck drivers here. Today we had one of the representatives of Truckers for Safety, I think it's called, right? And that was really interesting. But Travis McDougall was on with us, joined us via Zoom actually. But I've also talked to truck drivers, some of the same folks like in Brampton, for example, the truck drivers who are having to traverse these highways, and many of them come in and are not given proper training. They're not being and there is very little, if no regulation of trucking schools. Like, this is the kind of thing that at very least we should be expecting our government to bring in.
It's almost something we need at a national level.
Yeah.
Because you could learn how to drive in Toronto, and you sure aren't going to know how to drive on the Coquihalla Highway when there's 2 feet of snow on it in BC.
So true. I mean, we have I think 5 inspectors for 800 trucking schools in Ontario alone. That's ridiculous. And so, and it is, I think you made that point in one of your articles, like that need for, to think about, this is the Trans-Canada Highway. So where is the federal responsibility? That's something that I think we should be, certainly talking about at very least. But a lot of these drivers, I'm hearing it from themselves, from their families who often lost loved ones on our highways. They're not being prepared. They're not being trained properly. And at the end of the day, the companies themselves aren't necessarily being held responsible for what happens.
So there's a lot of work to do. What have you found touring around? You've been in Thunder Bay before,
yes,
but what's your feeling for how things are here? Sometimes we need that from an outside view, just to our city.
It's interesting because I grew up just outside St. John's in Newfoundland, and I find a lot of similarities with Thunder Bay. It's sort of a funny thing, but I do, and I think some of it is that there's a pride in a lot of the culture here. People get out, there's a lot of music, there's some really great things about Thunder Bay. Really interesting new businesses, people are really proud of certain things, but I think you have to honestly talk about the struggle that a lot of people are experiencing. For sure, some of these things we see all over the province, the homelessness issues, mental health addiction issues, but I think in Thunder Bay you guys are experiencing it really deeply. And yet what's exciting to me, as I said, was that there's a lot of people with some really innovative ideas, a lot of organizations in the community doing really excellent work, and yet still a lot of pain, a lot of struggle. And I have to say, I think communities that like Thunder Bay and in Northwestern Ontario generally, where the provincial government, Doug Ford likes to pretend he's like the people's guy, right? But really far removed from the reality of people here, and really not either wanting to understand or actually understanding what the challenges are in particularly in remote communities.
Oh, the remote communities is a whole other issue that we'll probably deal with
absolutely
another time. But I want to thank you for your time today.
Yeah,
and
thanks.
You're touring the region again tomorrow, so people can keep an eye out as you're going down the highway.
Yep, Terrace Bay, I'm going to go and talk to folks there about the closure of the mill and what that's going to mean, and maybe see what kinds of innovative solutions we can come up with to try to keep it open.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's James from Net News Ledger here in Thunder Bay, Ontario.